About the bump drill. This is a drill that was given to me quite a number of years ago, and I think that it's probably one that maybe through independent development or maybe people just sharing ideas back in the day came to me through some friends in the Southwest Pistol League when I started shooting back in the, I don't know, middle, late 70s. The question has always been, how do we develop trigger control skills that can keep up with what we see? You know, my thinking is that if you have the ability to press the trigger in a straight line to the rear, without other inputs into the gun, without putting side load in the gun, without crushing it, without doing anything else but press the trigger straight line to the rear until the pistol fires without other inputs, and you can do that relatively quickly, then you can actually shoot as fast as you want to shoot, subject to what you see and your ability to put the sights back on the target. So how do you develop that skill? And that was actually the question back in the day, because when I started shooting quite a long time ago, it was kind of at an era where we looked at trigger management skills as a corruption of traditional marksmanship, that the faster we went, the kind of the crummier and lousier and crappier our trigger management skills got because we're simply going faster. And some of us kind of got the light bulb that came on eventually that there has to be a better way, meaning that why should I necessarily shoot more poorly and use coarser skills when I'm going fast if I could actually develop trigger management skills that actually were just every bit as good, but simply compressed into a shorter time frame. But it was hard to come up with drills to do that. Back in the day, we wanted to control everything and we wanted to shoot fast, and we really looked at that necessary trade-off that we believed existed between speed and accuracy. And as I spoke, this morning earlier in the class, I don't believe in that trade-off. I actually don't believe beyond that which is, physical human limitations that the good Lord gave us, that there actually has to be a trade-off between speed and accuracy at all. If I have the ability to press the trigger in a straight line to the rear with no other inputs and not disturb the sights off the target, and I can do it relatively quickly, with two hands it's maybe a little more stable, then I should be able to shoot theoretically about as fast as the sights will come back on the target, and I can perceive that. Or I'm comfortable firing, based on my index skills. Either way, we needed a drill to do it. So Mike Dalton and Mickey Fowler, good old friends of mine from the Southwest Pistol League from the 70s, still good friends of mine and mentors of mine, came up with this concept that if we bump up against the sear, take up all the slack on the trigger, come up against the pressure wall such that further movement and pressure on the trigger will fire the gun, and add a little pressure, then come back out to the point at which the trigger stops, take up the slack again and add a little bit more pressure, and then come back out to the point at which the trigger stops, maintaining our contact with the face of the trigger, and continue to do that, putting little incremental slices of pressure onto the trigger each time until the striker or hammer finally falls. We can learn a number of things from that. What does that teach us? Do you have an idea what that would teach us? What does that get us?
How much pressure you can apply to prep the trigger before you fire.
Right? How much you can get away with, in other words. So the idea being that if I'm engaging a fairly discrete target in the middle of a string, say, and I need to be able to go from a relatively coarse target to a relatively fine target, I can have the trigger prepped and be able to get, some percentage of that work done, so that if I actually make the pistol fire subordinate to my immediate will, I'm going to do it in such a way that I don't spoil the shot as much, hopefully, right? So that would be kind of a way of looking at it. What else does it teach us? Well, from my viewpoint, it teaches me how much pressure I can put on the trigger and barely fire the gun. Many, many years ago, there was some experiments done where piezometric strain gauges were put on pistols, and people went out and shot, and it was found that even if they were shooting a 3.5 or 4 pound trigger, they were still putting maybe 15, 18, 20 pounds sometimes of pressure on the trigger when they're shooting quickly, which is completely counterproductive. So if you had the ability to come up with a drill that helped you to kind of reinforce this value of only putting just as much pressure on the trigger as necessary to barely make the pistol fire. So in this case, this pistol has a breaking weight on this trigger of just under 4 pounds. And if I could put 4 pounds and an ounce on it, that would be an advantage, wouldn't it? Versus mashing it and killing it. So that's another thing that it teaches us. A third thing that the bump drill gives us is a way of conditioning ourselves to release the trigger to what would be the reset point, and to do it in a really efficient way without causing a lot of excess motion and disturbance in the sights. Because when we're doing the drill and I'm actually observing the sights on my target as I'm dry firing, I can actually see if I'm actually putting other inputs to the gun. I can see the sights wiggling back and forth, and I can start to iron that out. So I can get to where my trigger management is actually pretty fluid, and I'm actually able to run the trigger back and forth without seeing an awful lot of disturbance. That's another thing that it gives us. We don't want to shoot and find ourselves trapping or stalling the trigger. And doing the bump drill at a pretty good rate, at the rate at which we would actually be operating the pistol if we're shooting quickly, is a way of kind of ironing all that out. Again, my belief is that you can run the trigger any way you want as long as it's in a straight line on axis to the bore, straight to the back, with no other inputs into the gun. And you can go as fast as you want. And the bump drill helps you to kind of reinforce that. You can do it, perform that drill at a rate that's basically as fast as you could imagine yourself shooting, realistically. Because again, if you can do that and not have the sights move, if you can just basically bump the trigger once and not have the sights move, then for that instant that the striker fires and falls and the gun goes off, or the hammer falls, you're the best shooter in the world. Nobody's doing any, that job better than you at that instant. Okay, so that's what this drill basically reinforces, and that's what we're going to do. So, any questions about it? You got it?
So how does the double action apply? Did you want to use this to?
It actually doesn't exactly in that, in a sense, but I could certainly talk about that. You want to come up?
Yeah.
Okay. How staged is this? Okay. If you would, go ahead and present your pistol. Walk your slide back. There you go. Okay, let's check it for clear. Got it. Thank you. Yeah, good question. This drill doesn't directly apply to the double action problem, but you have to be able to integrate the double action initial shot, if you will, into successive single action shots. Well, it used to be back in the day when I shot PPC, back in the early days of the late Triassic period. We put rubber stoppers on the back of our revolver triggers, and we'd lock the cylinder up, and then we'd kind of creep up on it and try to treat the double action pull as much like a single action as we could, because nobody was really comfortable pulling through a long, relatively heavy trigger pull, feeling that was going to be successful for them. Since then, we've kind of developed maybe better technique, a different understanding. What I'm getting at here is that we want to be able to, again, bump the trigger once to fire the pistol successfully without other inputs into the gun. So from your standpoint, it's just a dry firing problem. You're going to dry fire the pistol in such a way, running the trigger in a straight line to the rear, that you don't see any disturbance in the sights, and you commit to the trigger. That's actually kind of a concept that's hard for people to really fathom, because one of the reasons I think that people struggle with a double action pull is because they don't commit to the trigger when the three conditions are met and they've made that conscious decision to fire. Instead, they're trying to coordinate what they do with the trigger through what they see, and they end up with conflict with themselves. Is the sight picture good enough? Am I really there? Am I ready to fire? Not quite right. And that kind of semi or conscious conflict leads them to find themselves kind of coming up on the trigger part of the way and then snatching at it when it looks right, which is bad enough when the trigger in single action mode is maybe 4 1/4, 4.5 pounds, right? But it's pretty disastrous when it's 11 pounds. And you're trying to pull through a residual amount of motion at that weight just to make the pistol fire, when you think that it should. So the idea is that you have to accept what you see, that it's good enough, and commit to the trigger when those three conditions are met. And you run the trigger in a straight line to the rear without interruption, without stop, or without acceleration, at an even pace all the way to the back. And if you dry fire and groove that in, and you have faith that you can do that, you will. And so that basically kind of answers that question. And then from there, you're back to doing the bump.
So you do the bump after you get your first single action out of the way?
Yeah. And you could actually, from a training standpoint, if you're actually doing the bump live fire, you could run your first shot as a double action shot and then back it up with a little bit of bump. I mean, you could change that up. But again, the purpose of the bump drill is not an end to itself. It's simply a bridge to being able to develop the ability in single action mode to run the trigger out to the reset point, take up the slack very quickly, and be able to apply significant pressure on the trigger as or before you finalize that shot, see what you need to see to be able to break the shot and still not disturb the sights. Because, let's face it, we're not being surprised by the shot. We talked about that in class. I mean, realistically, we're not creeping up on the trigger and dancing around, coordinating pressure with what we see in the sights until the pistol fires for every shot when we're shooting 3 or 4 shots a second. We're making the gun go off when we want it to. The thing is, we have to do it in such a way that that shot is going to be successful and that the action of running the trigger doesn't disturb the sights. That's why the big thing that I think the bump drill does more than anything else is it helps us develop that sense of isolation of the index finger from the rest of the hand. The only thing that's running here, hopefully, within reason, are the little muscles that run the finger and nothing else. And that's really a difficult thing, I think, for people to grasp and actually internalize, this idea that shooting the pistol, operating the pistol, is really just a function of having a very small number of muscles in a straight line back and forth. Okay. So, any questions about that? Good? Okay, thanks.